Hello, my name's Lizzie. I'm Anglican, and in 6 days' time, I'm going to be moving into a convent ready to become a postulant. Here are 8 ways I think it would be very difficult for a nun to escape the real world.
Imagine that you wanted to escape the real world for a few days. I imagine you decided to go away for a couple of weeks to escape your housemates or to get some time away from your family or get away from your colleagues or whatever your life entails. So imagine you get a tent and you go and you find the middle of a forest or a desert or a mountainside to go and pitch your tent in. So imagine you've done the bit of you have the excitement of looking for where to put your tent, and then you put your tent up and you might make your first cup of tea or coffee outside somehow with a fire or something, and then you sit down and there's no Facebook to look at, there's no TV to watch. You probably left your books behind because you want to be completely away from the world, just sat there in silence. So the silence begins, and I expect after even a few hours, you're starting to feel either bored or things are starting to come up that you haven't looked at for weeks or months or years. And the longer you spend on your own, or the longer you spend in silence as these days go on, that you're trying to escape the world, various things will keep coming into your mind, like conversations you've had in the past, things that have happened in the past. Maybe things start to come up that need healing in you, or things start to come up that you realize you still haven't let go of. All kinds of things will start coming up in the silence. And this just goes to show that you can't, even if you try and get away from what's in your normal life, you're never going to get away from yourself. You're going to be stuck with your own personality, with your own memories, with your own whatever's going on inside you. And actually what you'll find in reality is that by having tried to escape your normal life or escape the world that you're used to living in, you've just been confronted with the deeper issues in your own life. So you've actually been confronted with your most real life, or with your real world inside you. Imagine I'm not really a people person and I like just being on my own. I like not having to talk to people much. So imagine, because of that, the idea of living in a convent really appeals to me, because there's lots of silence and lots of quiet, and I don't have to talk to people so much. What will happen is that the minute I get into the convent, I'll realize that I've become part of a family that I've got to fit in with. And there might be people and these are people I haven't necessarily chosen to live with, or I can't choose who lives in the convent with me. And some of these people might have completely different personalities from me, might have different views from me on different things. Some of them might have habits that I find really annoying or frustrating, but I've got to live with these people 24/7. And whereas if you're living with people 24/7 in a family setting, at least if you need a break from people in your family, you can like go out for a walk or for a drive, or you can just go out for the day or something like that. Or if you're sharing with housemates or whatever setting you're in, normally if you're sharing a house with people or a building, you can get out and do something to get away from them for a while. But in a convent setting, that's not so easy at all. So actually everyone that you're living with, you've got to live with people that you might find annoying at times, or frustrating, or not understand completely, and you can't escape them so easily. I think probably without realizing it, we do a lot of things in our day to distract ourselves. Like we might use internet or TV or shopping or food in general, or all sorts of things as kind of like little distraction techniques or escape routes from actually focusing on the things that we ought to be focusing on, like either from doing the things that we ought to be doing at the moment, or from looking at the things that God would want us to be looking at. So yeah, we have all these kind of little distraction techniques, and actually once you're in a convent setting, the idea is that the simplified life is actually, I think part of that is that you're trying to minimize the amount of distraction techniques that you can try and use, or like little mini escapes from what God wants you to be looking at, that we try and use in things like a lot of TV or internet or going out or that kind of thing. And so actually a convent setting, for that kind of reason, actually forces you to look at the things that God wants you to be paying attention to, because you can't be distracted by other things. I think a few people might think that living in a convent is a bit like living in a hotel, but actually, because of its usually like slightly bigger size than a normal house, it just actually means like extra cleaning and a lot more duties to maintain it. So living in a convent is, there's no way that that's escaping the kind of the duties and the chores of everyday life. Like all the things that we've got to do, like cleaning the kitchen, taking the rubbish out, hoovering, all those kinds of things you've got to do in a convent, but for an even greater area, like even bigger rooms, or even more washing up. So there's no way that living in a convent helps you escape just like the normal, boring, like daily chores of life, because there are plenty of them in a convent setting. From talking with sisters and living in a convent for a bit, I've picked up that actually, although there are set times in a nun's timetable for when there are services and when the sisters come together in chapel to pray together, and although there might be time specified in the timetable for this is when sisters can pray on their own in their rooms, I think sisters still have to work out for themselves how they're going to fit their own like personal times for prayer in the day. And I've picked up that actually there are times when that can be like really difficult. Maybe something unexpected has come up, like a sister's got really ill and needs caring for, or maybe just that there's a lot to be done in the convent that day, or there's the sisters are really busy in ministry. I get the impression that although that there are maybe like set times of prayer in the day for when the sisters come together, that time for more personal prayer, each sister has actually got to really try hard to find a time to fit that kind of prayer in her day. And actually the days can be very busy, so it really can be quite difficult to find time in a convent to have time for personal prayer if it's not already kind of marked in your timetable. I guess sisters will kind of work out their own routine, but I've definitely talked to sisters about times when they couldn't pray on their own as much as they would have liked to in the day, and they just had to find ways of praying while they were doing things, like when there were kind of when extreme situations came up. But also, even if you found the time, even if you found half an hour in your day to sit down and pray on your own, sisters are just as human as everyone else, and so even though you might have found the time, there's nothing stopping you getting distracted while you're praying, or like struggling to pray just like everyone does at times. So again, that sisters aren't kind of divorced from the struggles of prayer that everyone faces. Uncertainty about the future is a massive part of, I guess, most people's lives, and I don't think being in a convent, although you've got a kind of security of you've got a bed and a roof over your head and you know you're going to be fed the next day, so you've got a certain security that, say, someone that's homeless or vulnerably housed doesn't have. You still got other uncertainties like everyone else, like where you'll be in a few years' time, like where will the community have to move elsewhere in the country, like where will your what does your financial future look like, what will more people join the community to carry this community forward into the next few decades. So that there are lots of kind of big uncertainties in the life of a convent that might kind of have parallels in the kind of uncertainties that other people have in their lives. Nuns seem like extremely aware of what's going in the world, and they seem to have a real connection with the world, and that's probably partly because a lot of nuns sort of feel they've got a strong sense that intercession is a big part of their vocation, and lots of people will give prayer requests to convents. And also just the very fact that you're spending so much time in prayer means that you're thinking of other people more than yourself, or the life a convent life kind of helps like take you in that kind of direction of thinking of others more than yourself. And because you've made vows, like especially the vow of poverty, that makes you maybe like identify more with people who are living without very much money, or without very many possessions, or without much kind of choice or control over their lives. So you've got that kind of connection with poverty, the poverty of the world. And also, just like you hear that people who lose one of their five senses, the result is often that one of or more of their other senses kind of become heightened. So if someone becomes blind, it might be that they become even better at hearing to compensate. And because sisters might have like less to distract them in their lives, I think that's probably what makes them even more aware of the voices in the world, like that are crying out for justice or crying out for peace, or just makes them more aware of the world. And I think it might be for similar reasons that a lot of sisters I've met, that they've got such good memories of prayer requests that they've received in the past, or that they've often got people on their minds that they've been praying about, and I'm sure a lot of this is to do with but because other things in their life have been simplified, it means that the lives of other people and caring about other people takes on a bigger role in their lives. It's interesting what we consider the real world, because I've often had conversations with people where they think that like rich people don't know the real world, because the real world is poor people living in rough neighborhoods. But actually, people who are rich and living extravagant lifestyles, that is also part of the real world that we live in. So in a way, like, real world is a kind of like subjective phrase, or a phrase that everyone interprets for themselves. And I suppose the only, like, the most real thing in the world is God. So actually, any attempt to care about what's most real, you're better looking at God, because God is what's most real. And like I've said in other points in this video, when you're in a convent setting, it kind of forces you to look at God more, or the silence, or the being on your own more, or the lack of distractions and the simplicity and all these things actually help lead you to listen to God more and be open more to God. And you might find this with when you just spend a lot of time in prayer, a lot of time in silence, that the more time you spend with God, the more God's going to help you open up to the things that God cares about. So you're going to find that over time you're caring less about your own life and more about other people's lives, and you're caring less about the little things in life and more about the big picture. And so you see throughout history lots of monks and nuns or other people who've been very contemplative, like very quiet and prayerful. They've often been the most active or vocal or influential in big themes like social justice or world peace or environmental issues. And this has all come from them actually having this more simple and quiet and contemplative life. So I don't think there's any need to kind of any cause for concern that someone who's going to go into a more simple life or quiet life, or is going to become more distant from the world, because so long as God is the main person they're looking at, that will only make them even more in touch with the world.